The sunset draped over the city of Edmonton, the last light shattering on the frosted ice of Commonwealth Stadium, once the kingdom of a man who rewrote football history with his own hands. Warren Moon, 68, walked slowly across the cold turf, his breath steaming in the winter air. He was once the pride of two nations in Canada. He won 5 consecutive Grey Cup championships, was named Most Outstanding Player twice, and became the first professional quarterback to throw over 5,000 yards in a season. In America, he was the heart of the Houston Oilers, setting yardage records, earning 9 Pro Bowl selections, the 1990 Offensive Player of the Year, and becoming a symbol of breaking racial stereotypes in the NFL. When he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2006, thousands stood in tears, for Warren Moon didn't just win for himself, but for a generation denied their dreams. They called him the compass of belief, the man who paved the way for black quarterbacks who dared to dream, dared to hold the ball, dared to stare down prejudice and turn it into a challenge. But now, in Edmonton's chill, the stadium lights have dimmed, the stands filled only with the sound of wind whistling through metal. The arm that once threw farther than anyone now trembles slightly in the mist, his back hunched from countless collisions. Each step echoes with the dry crunch of cleats, like the heartbeat of an aging man resisting time. Old concussions keep him awake, his head aches, his memory fades day by day. The darkness isn't just around the field, but in his mind, where memories of playoff losses and skeptical glances linger like unhealed wounds. The hardest throw, he once said, isn't between two defenders, but through the darkness within yourself. And tonight, on the fog-covered empty field, he makes that throw again, not to win, but to prove that human will can outlast time, and pride can survive long after the applause has faded. In a small apartment in south-central Los Angeles in the 1960s, where war and racial segregation still scarred every street corner, a boy sat by a narrow window, silently watching car lights reflect on the wall. His father, Harold Moon, had died of liver disease when the boy was 7. From that day, in that house, everything grew eerily quiet. His mother, Pat, a night shift nurse at the local hospital, came home at dawn, with dark circles under her eyes, and the smell of antiseptic clinging to her clothes. 6 younger sisters, and only him, the lone son, amid a sea of female voices, sewing needles, sizzling pans, and nighttime cries. Warren learned to survive in a world without men. He knew how to sew clothes, cook rice, wash laundry, lull his sisters to sleep, and keep the house standing when his mother was gone. But one thing he never learned: how to fill the void his father left. Each night, as wind whistled through the window frame, he heard his mother's hoarse, weary cough from the next room. He pulled the blanket tight, shut his eyes, but tears still slid silently onto his pillow. He knew if his mother fell, the family would collapse with her. In that darkness, the 7-year-old began to understand he could not afford to be weak. School wasn't any kinder. There, other kids had fathers picking them up after class, while he trudged home alone on the bus, clutching an old football to his chest, like the only thing that could hold warmth. He liked throwing it against a brick wall, hearing the dry thud echo back, like a rare response in a lonely world. He imagined the wall was a teammate, his father, the only invisible audience who understood what he was trying to say with each throw. Every time the ball came back to my hands, it felt like someone was saying I was still here, he recalled years later. But when he told his teacher he wanted to be a quarterback, skeptical looks appeared. "You're small, that position's not for people like you." In 1960s America, quarterback was a white man's role, demanding intelligence and leadership, qualities society then claimed black people lacked. Those words, light as a breeze, cut into him like a knife. On rare nights when his mother could sit with him, she spoke briefly. "You have to be strong. No one will give you a chance, you have to take it." Then she'd leave, the scent of antiseptic lingering. Warren sat alone, staring at his father's empty chair, listening to the clock tick, vowing silently, "One day I'll make them remember my name." But deep down, that vow carried a quiet fear, the fear of being abandoned, forgotten, seen as invisible, like his father taken by illness, like his mother drained by life. He grew up between two worlds. one of little girls needing him as their anchor, and another outside filled with invisible barriers. Whenever he saw a classmate's father playing catch with his son in the park, Warren turned away, pretending to tie his shoes to hide his tears. But those moments forged a strange resilience, the will of a child who couldn't afford to fall. At 10 he could fix pipes, repair outlets, cook dinner for the family. At 12, he applied for scholarships and found odd jobs to ease his mother's burden. He lived like an adult trapped in a child's body, always stronger than he needed to be. As a teenager, football became his private religion. The grass of Hamilton High School's field was the only place he could shout, throw hard, and forget his loneliness. But even there, prejudice lurked in the coach's glances. He was pushed to play wide receiver, defensive back, anything but quarterback. He accepted silently, trained until his hands burned, and when everyone left, he sneaked onto the field, stood at the midline, and threw alone in the dark. The ball hit the goalpost, fell, and he picked it up, hundreds, thousands of times. That's how he learned to lead, not with power, but with persistence. Sometimes, watching the ball soar into the Los Angeles night, he imagined it reaching his father somewhere far away. "I haven't stopped," he whispered. That throw, though just a lonely boy's game, was the start of a great journey, a journey through grief, prejudice, and the absence of love to become a man who dared to stand in a place an entire generation was barred from. But on the longest nights, when everyone slept, Warren woke, sat by the window, watched car lights pass, and felt an unnameable void. In that silence, the fear of abandonment grew, seeping into his veins, and for the rest of his life, even amid roaring crowds, he carried the lonely sound of that small apartment, where a 7-year-old once waited for his mother's footsteps in the night. The lonely boy from Los Angeles turned 18 with worn shoes, a scuffed football, and a silent promise to his mother, "I won't let anyone look down on me." But the path to his dream of being a quarterback, a position society still saw as a white man's privilege, was like crossing a desert without water. Big schools rejected him with a glance and a smooth excuse. "You could play defensive back or run the ball, don't try QB." Warren understood the subtext. No one wanted a black man leading a team, reading plays, commanding white players to follow, but he refused to switch positions. So the doors of elite colleges slammed shut. Only West Los Angeles College, a small community school, gave him a chance because they needed someone willing to try. There, on a worn-out field, Moon, the boy no one knew, began his rebellion with his hands and his belief. Practices had no spectators, just the sound of grass under cleats, and the panting of a few players left after class. But every throw from Warren was a declaration. The ball sliced through California's sunset, landing precisely in a teammate's hands 40 yards away. The coach watched, shaking his head. That kid's got something unusual. It was the first time Warren made someone notice him not for his skin but for his throws. And then a miracle happened. The University of Washington, a prestigious Northwest program, spotted him. They needed a quarterback willing to take risks. He got a scholarship, left Los Angeles with an old suitcase and fresh hope. Seattle in 1975 greeted him with rain and suspicion. In the Huskies' locker room, Warren was the outsider, quiet among boisterous blonde, blue-eyed players. At first, no one spoke to him. The head coach, while praising his talent, gave a measured look. "You're smart, Warren, but not the kind of leader we want." The words carved a cold mark in his memory. Leadership, to them, meant white, loud and old-school confident. Warren, with his low voice and patient eyes, was seen as lacking command. He didn't argue, answering only with the precision of his throws. January 1978, the Rose Bowl, the most prestigious college game, became where fate found him. The Washington Huskies faced the Michigan Wolverines, a team expected to crush them. All week, the press barely mentioned Warren, dismissing him as a temporary QB. But in those 60 minutes, the young man tore through every stereotype. Rain poured, the ball was slick, the field slippery, but each pass was guided by the bottled-up anger of his youth. He threw 27 passes, 18 on target, scored 3 touchdowns, and led his team to a 27-20 victory. When the final whistle blew, thousands chanted his name. Rose Bowl MVP. America saw a black quarterback at the center, holding the trophy high. But amid the confetti rain, Warren stood smiling, yet empty inside. He looked to the stands where his mother sat, her tired eyes glistening. He knew this should have been his NFL launchpad. But deep down, he sensed this victory wouldn't break the wall of prejudice, and that instinct was cruelly accurate. The 1978 NFL Draft passed without a single team calling Warren Moon's name. No letters, no calls. 335 players were picked, including some who never started, but not him. The press wrote delicately, "Teams worry Washington's system doesn't fit the NFL," but the truth was clear. They feared a black quarterback's failure would tarnish the pure white image of the position. His old coach sent a brief letter, "You did your best, but sometimes the world isn't ready." Warren read it, crumpled it, and threw it at the wall. "If America isn't ready, I'll find somewhere else." That night, he drove alone through Seattle, the radio blaring sports news about young QBs drafted. He turned it off, parked by Lake Union, and watched lights reflect on the water. In the rearview mirror, his face, a Rose Bowl winner's, looked tired, alone, teamless, futureless. He won the game, he thought, but lost his country. The words were both pain and proclamation. Days later, the phone rang. A man's voice, thick with a Canadian accent. "We're the Edmonton Eskimos, CFL. Up here, we just need you to throw." Warren paused, staring at the draft ticket with no name, then gave a bitter smile. "Maybe that's all I ever wanted." He hung up, stepped onto the balcony, and took a deep breath, the cold wind cutting his face, wind from the north, where a new chapter waited. He knew he was heading into the unknown, but staying meant his dream would die. So Warren Moon, America's unchosen hero, packed his clothes, kissed his mother's forehead, and left. The flight to Canada the next morning cut through snow. Outside the window, the winter sun was just a faint glow, and in that light, a man quietly began his exile, a journey that would turn pain into a weapon, and a rejected dream into an immortal legacy. The plane landed in Edmonton, in mid-February, thick snow blanketing the runway. Warren Moon stepped off, his thin jacket no match for the skin-cutting cold. No television lights, no waiting crowd, just an airport worker pushing a luggage cart, smiling, "Welcome to the North, kid." And so the Rose Bowl champion started from zero in a foreign land, where temperatures could plunge to -30. He rented a small room in a poor neighborhood near Commonwealth Stadium, where wind howled through door cracks and snow seeped past a chipped window. Each night, after practice, he sat by the window, watching the city's dim lights reflect on the snow, writing letters home. "Don't worry, Mom, I'm okay, but everything here, it's colder than I thought." In Canada, he was free to be a quarterback, but that freedom came with isolation. Local players saw him as an outsider, an American stealing their spot. Reporters dubbed him the American experiment. At practice, his breath steamed, the ball was icy, and the wind blew so hard every throw veered off course. But Warren didn't complain. He stayed late, alone on the snowy field, throwing hundreds of passes, until his fingers turned purple and his lips cracked. Sometimes the ball dropped, rolling across the ice, and he'd chase it, slipping, face slamming into the frozen ground. Each time he stood, he told himself, "I've come this far, I can't fall just because of the cold." Edmonton in those years was harsh, but it forged his will. Day by day, game by game, he won over teammates with his resilience. They called him Iceman, the one who didn't fear the frost. In 1978, he led the team to their first Grey Cup win. Then 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982, 5 straight, an unmatched record. Twice named Most Outstanding Player, he became the CFL's brightest star. Canadian papers wrote, "Moon's arm could cut through the winter sky." But at night, after the applause, he returned to his empty room, soaking his hands in hot water, to ease the numbness, writing unsent letters. "I'm doing well, Mom. But sometimes, in the wind, I hear someone calling my name from the old country." Outside, snow kept falling. Teammates gathered in bars, but he stayed at the field, throwing. Some days, The cold was so bitter that blood from his nose dripped onto his jersey, freezing red against white. An assistant coach begged, "Warren, go home, you'll collapse." He just smiled. "If I don't do this, who'll remember me?" In his mind, he saw his father, his mother, the NFL's doubting eyes. Each throw was a silent act of revenge. The weight of fame began to press. When the team won, they called him a genius QB. When they lost, whispers returned. "He's not Canadian, just a guest." Once in a diner, he overheard someone mutter, "He only wins because the team's strong, not because of him." Warren turned away, fists clenched, until veins bulged, but said nothing. He was used to letting the ball speak for him. In 1982, he made history over 5,000 passing yards, a first in professional football. American papers took notice, but his heart stayed cold. "I've proven my ability," he said, "but not where I belong." Success brought money, fame, and pain. His spine ached when seasons changed. His right shoulder stabbed like needles with every hard throw. Once after a game, he couldn't remove his jersey, needing teammates to pull it off as his shoulder locked. But he played the next week, driven by a voice in his head. "If I rest, they'll say black men can't handle the cold." The price of resilience was loneliness. He had almost no close friends, just a few photos of his mother and sisters tucked in his wallet. In the winter of 1982, after the fifth straight Grey Cup win, he sat alone in the locker room, an unopened champagne bottle beside him. Outside, teammates celebrated, but he stared at a foggy mirror, his face tired, eyes shadowed, lips bloodied from a hit. The metallic glint of the championship trophy reflected on the wall, cold and distant. He knew he'd done what no one believed possible, but his heart felt heavy. That night, he left the stadium, walking through snow. The wind cut through his coat, snow clinging to his prematurely gray hair. He stopped on an empty street, looked up at the pale gray sky, snowflakes swirling around him, and whispered, "Glory shines brightest in the ice, but melts as fast as snow." Then he closed his eyes, letting the wind carry his breath. Far away, America stayed silent, not yet calling his name. But in this cold land, Warren Moon had become a symbol, a man exiled from his homeland, finding light in a snowy wilderness where only the toughest hearts could survive. In the spring of 1984, as Edmonton's snow melted into muddy streams flooding the sidewalks, Warren Moon left Canada with 5 championship rings in his luggage and a heart that never knew peace. The NFL finally knocked. Houston Oilers, a Southern American team, wanted him back. The offer felt like a belated redemption from a football world that once turned its back. But Moon knew this wasn't just a chance, it was another test, where the lights weren't as cold as snow, but the chill of prejudice lingered. When the plane landed in Texas, the sun blazed, the air thick with oil and dust. On the drive to the Astrodome, he saw billboards with his image in a new uniform, the return of the legend. In Houston, they welcomed him like a hero back from the snow, the first black saint of the quarterback position. But beneath the cheers were wary eyes, unspoken questions. Is he really good enough for the NFL? His first day in the locker room, Moon felt the strange silence. Some teammates nodded politely, others glanced over. The walls displayed white legends, Nemeth, Unitas, Montana, and a small crooked photo of Moon, hastily pinned. "You the CFL stray?" a defensive player asked, half joking. Warren just smiled. He knew this game. He'd heard it his whole life. But this time, he wouldn't react. He let the ball answer. The coach said, "You might need time to adjust." Moon replied, "I've been ready my whole life." And then the Astrodome, Texas's giant dome, neon lights and 70,000 fans became his new battlefield. When the first whistle blew, he threw a long pass through the defense, hitting a receiver nearly 50 yards away. The crowd erupted. Reporters wrote, "Moonlight shines bright in Houston." But even as cheers echoed, he felt the emptiness inside. No one truly believed this would last. His early years in Houston were a mix of magic and hell. He led the league in passing yards, turned the Oilers into a fan favorite, and earned Pro Bowl nods within seasons. But in the locker room, whispers persisted. Some players said, "He's good, but CFL isn't NFL. Wait, he'll crack." Moon heard it all, didn't react. He remembered his mother's words, Don't answer with words, answer with work. So he worked first to arrive, last to leave, throwing hundreds of passes daily until his shoulder burned. The press began calling him the Black Messiah of the quarterback. A New York paper wrote, "Moon carries the burden of a race, not just a team." He read it, sighed softly. He never asked to bear a community's weight, but he couldn't escape it. Every missed pass was magnified as proof. Black QBs aren't consistent. Every win was a temporary miracle. Even in big victories, he faced questions. How's it feel to be one of the few black QBs in the NFL? Never just QB. In December 1987, Houston beat Seattle in a thrilling game. Moon was flawless, 360 yards, 3 touchdowns. Fans flooded the field, chanting his name. But in the locker room, a reporter asked, "Do you think black guys can finally lead a team?" The question stung like a slap. He looked at his bandaged hands, gave a faint smile. "I think I just did." Then he walked away. That night, at home, he turned off the lights, sat in the dark, the TV's glow flickering on the wall. Sports broadcasts showed his highlights, but outside, neighbors kept their distance. He received thousands of fan letters, most adoring, but some hateful, with scrawled words, "Go back to Canada, you half-baked fraud." In 1990, Moon hit his career peak, Offensive Player of the Year, leading the NFL in passing yards. Houston glowed. He became the city's face. TV shows invited him, sports magazines put him on covers, calling him the commander. But behind the smile, he felt cracks. Pressure pressed his chest. He rarely slept through the night, often waking in cold sweats. Shoulder and back pain from his CFL days returned, sharper, and with it, loneliness. In his big suburban Houston house, he ate dinner alone. The clink of his fork on the plate sounded like a countdown clock. Friends said Warren Moon was the man with everything, but nothing to hold on to. Outwardly he was perfection, polished, professional, cool. But inside, he feared the very light that lifted him. He knew one slip, one loss, and the world would turn. He was no longer just the kid rejected for his skin. He was now the man who must prove it for every black man. One mistake would be a generation's failure. One night, after a big win over Cleveland, he drove through the city, not heading home but straight to the Astrodome. The stadium lights were off, only the glow of distant billboards illuminating the dark. He climbed the stands, sat in the front row, and stared at the silent turf. "I've come back to my homeland," he thought, "but why do I still feel cold?" The night wind swept through the dome, carrying echoes of the past. In Edmonton, the cold bit his skin. In Houston, it lived in his heart. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and realized that amidst the South's dazzling lights, loneliness remained his only constant companion. That night, Warren Moon stood, walked to the empty field, his shadow stretching long across the grass. From this place, he had made America believe a black man could do the impossible, but this place was also devouring him bit by bit. Light too bright could melt ice, but it could also burn a heart. And he understood, glory in Houston wasn't a reward, but an illusion, beautiful, radiant, but cruelly fragile. January 1993, the Astrodome shone like a colossal cathedral. The smell of artificial turf, sweat and fresh paint on the packed stands, blended together. That day, Warren Moon threw like a divine machine. In the first half, the Houston Oilers led the Buffalo Bills 35-3. Fans in the stands chanted his name, shouting, "Super Bowl, here we come," believing Moon's curse was finally breaking, that a black quarterback was at last nearing America's throne. In that moment, he felt every year of exile in Canada, every freezing night practicing alone, every skeptical glance in NFL meetings, all worth it. But hours later, paradise turned to hell. The third quarter began, and the wind shifted. Buffalo struck back fiercely. Each of their throws pierced Houston's fans like daggers. 28 points, then 31, then 38. On the scoreboard, the gap closed like a blade slicing through the team's pride. Moon kept throwing, trying to stay calm, but fate seemed to switch sides. An interception, a missed pass, and in a flash, the lead vanished. When the final whistle blew, the score was 41-38 for Buffalo. The comeback, the greatest turnaround in NFL history, and a wound Warren Moon would never heal. The Houston locker room after the game was so silent, you could hear sweat dripping from players' hair onto the floor. No one spoke. They passed each other like ghosts. Moon sat in a corner, hands still wrapped in white tape, lips pressed until they bled. On the floor, his helmet rolled, stopping under the nameplate Moon. He stared at it, eyes empty. Everything he'd done, tens of thousands of passing yards, victories, breaking through prejudice, dissolved in one afternoon. No Super Bowl, no ultimate glory, only a throbbing silence remained. That night, Houston dimmed early. In his suburban mansion, Warren sat alone in the living room, the TV muted, replaying the game like torture. He rewatched the intercepted pass, his teammates' faces, fans leaving the stands. Then he turned it off, poured a drink, but didn't sip. He just sat, the desk lamp casting light on his sweat-streaked face, eyes bloodshot. "I could beat any defense," he whispered, "but never the past. The past years of rejection, being sidelined, skeptical stares." Even at his peak, he carried the feeling that one mistake would prove the world right. In the days that followed, headlines screamed, "The collapse of a hero, Moon's legacy crumbles under pressure." On radio, they debated the cost of delusion. One commentator said coldly, "Moon's a great QB, but maybe the NFL was never his place." The words stabbed like 1,000 needles. He still went to practice, smiled at teammates, shook reporters' hands, but inside, he was fracturing. One morning, the coach arrived early, finding him already on the field. No ball, no teammates, just him. The cold wind blew, and he picked up a ball from a bag, threw it toward the empty goalpost, then retrieved it, throwing again, over and over, until his shirt was soaked. "Warren, what are you doing here so early?" the coach asked. Moon turned, gave a faint smile, "Just seeing how long I can still throw." His voice was hoarse, but his eyes still burned, a mix of pride and despair. The next season, the Oilers tried to recover, but their spirit never did. Moon played well, but each win felt like an apology. They no longer called him savior, but the one who let the dream slip. With every article revisiting the Buffalo game, he died a little more. His wife said he sat on the balcony until dawn, silent. Sometimes he'd get up, go to the gym, and throw a ball against the wall, as if trying to pierce the past. In November, a reporter asked, "Do you think you still have a shot at a championship?" Moon paused for a long time, then said, "Everyone has a shot, but not everyone has enough faith left to believe in it." That answer was quoted everywhere, fans calling it the most brutally honest line in sports, but only those crushed by prejudice understood. In that voice was a lifetime of being forced to be strong. Another evening, he went to the Astrodome after everyone left. The stadium lights were off, only security lamps casting shadows through the dome. He sat in the middle of the field, touching the artificial turf, whispering, "I did everything I could." The cold from the ground seeped into his skin, reminding him of Canada, where snow once froze him but never broke him. Now, in the hot South, he felt that cold again, not from the weather, but from within. The cold of a man who fought a lifetime for recognition, only to be judged by a single failure. Leaving, he looked back at the Astrodome one last time, once a temple of light, now drowned in darkness. He knew for fans the Buffalo game would forever be his legacy. No one mentioned the 9 Pro Bowls, the record-setting seasons. They only remembered that fall. And he, who survived Canada's blizzards, was now buried under a new snow of memory, regret, and unachieved dreams. Years later, asked about his most unforgettable moment, Warren Moon only smiled. Buffalo, 1993. The reporter started to ask more, but he raised a hand, cutting them off. "Sometimes you have to let a loss become part of your soul. I don't forget it, I live with it." And he did, carrying that invisible scar through every season after. Glory still came, money still flowed, his name etched in stone, but deep in his heart, Warren Moon remained the man alone in the 1993 locker room, clutching blood-stained tape, listening to sweat drip from the ceiling, wondering, how can someone conquer the world, except their own memories? Autumn 1996. Minnesota's sky hung gray like a wet blanket. Warren Moon, nearing 40, wore the Vikings purple with the pride of a legend, but his shoulders began betraying his past strength. During a game against the Carolina Panthers, as he threw his third long pass, a dry crack rang out, not a helmet's clash, but his collarbone breaking. Pain hit like fire, radiating down his right arm. He fell to the grass, stadium lights blinding, teammates' faces blurring around him. In that moment, he heard his heart race, mixed with the referee's whistle and the crowd's roar, all merging into one sound: the end. A stretcher carried him off, past stands of fans standing to clap. He raised his left hand, tried to smile, but it twisted, holding both pride and pain. In the cold tunnel, fluorescent lights lit his sweat-soaked face. A nurse held his hand, whispering, "Don't sleep, Warren. Keep your eyes open." He replied hoarsely, "I still see the light, so I'm okay." But inside, he knew his career was flickering like an oil lamp. Hennepin Hospital's operating room greeted him with the sharp smell of antiseptic. The white ceiling lights recalled Edmonton's snowy nights, except then he was whole. The heart monitor beeped steadily, bleep, bleep, amid the clink of surgical tools. The doctor said they'd need metal pins to hold the bone. He nodded, silent. As anesthesia took hold, he dreamed of standing in the old Astrodome. Stands empty, the ball slipping from his hand, no one there to pick it up. Waking, the white lights remained, but the room was empty. No teammates, no reporters, no noise, just a painful stillness. Days later, reporters visited the hospital. One asked, "Is this the end?" Warren looked at his bandaged shoulder, his voice tired but firm. "If it's the end, I'll still try to write one more sentence." They left, leaving him with a phone by the bed. He dialed a familiar number, heard it ring. On the other end was his wife, Felicia. Her voice was flat, distant. "You're hurt again." He pressed his lips, said, "I just want to hear you say I believe in you. Just once." A long pause, then a sigh, the click of the phone hanging up. Only the beep, beep of the dial tone remained in the white room. He set the receiver down, leaned back on the pillow, and for the first time in years, tears fell, not from physical pain, but from realizing everything was slipping away: his body, his marriage, his faith. Felicia had been by his side through the dark years in the CFL, sharing cold bus rides and cheap meals. But as time passed, amidst seasons, press conferences, and endless nights away, the distance between them grew. Warren lived in noise, she in silence. While he fought to prove himself to the world, he didn't see he was losing the one person who never needed proof. That hospital call was their last intimate conversation. A year later, they separated. Recovery took longer than expected. Warren endured daily physical therapy, relearning how to raise his arm, throw, and bear the pain. Each morning, he looked at his shoulder in the mirror, the long scar like a road dividing past and present. The Vikings coach visited, urging rest, suggesting retirement. He shook his head. "If I stop, they'll say I'm too old. I can't let them be right." Then he stepped onto the field, arm bandaged, watching teammates practice, eyes distant. Loneliness weighed heavier than ever. In a Minnesota hotel, he couldn't sleep. The wind whistling through the window reminded him of snowy Edmonton nights, of his first steps on a freezing field, heart full of fire. Now that fire flickered. Some nights, he called his child, hearing their small voice ask, "Does it hurt, Dad?" He smiled, "No, kid, I'm just tired." But when the call ended, he buried his face in his hands, sighing. In December, he returned to practice. His shoulder wasn't fully healed, but he insisted on trying. Each throw was a gamble. The ball flew, hit its mark, but sharp pain tore through his shoulder. The coach ran over, shouting, "Enough, Warren. You're not 25 anymore." He squinted at the empty stands, voice soft, "No, I'm just trying to hold on to who I was." The press wrote that Moon was fighting time, but really, he was fighting himself: fear of leaving, fear of becoming a memory. In sports they say, go out on top. But he couldn't, because for him, leaving meant admitting that years of pain and broken barriers ended with a snapped bone. One cold evening after practice, he stayed on the field alone. Light snow fell, dusting the stands. He picked up a ball, threw gently, just to feel it again. The ball arced slowly, landed mid-field, rolled and stopped. Moon walked over, picked it up, held it tight, eyes misty. On the stands, wind rattled a billboard with his name, the letters swaying like his life then, a legend cracking, in bone and belief. That was the first fall of Warren Moon's soul, not when he was knocked down on the field, but when he realized that sometimes the easiest thing to break isn't bone, but faith. In the late 1990s, Warren Moon donned a New Jersey, Seattle Seahawks, returning to the land where his college dreams began. Seattle's sky was still gray, rain near constant, but to Moon, it now tasted of age and defiance. At 41, he stood on the field, hands taped, knees braced, watching younger teammates sprint around him. They called him names, half respectful, half teasing. Old Man Moon, Grandpa QB. The press was harsher. Moon should hang it up before he embarrasses himself. Each word, carved into his already cracked pride. But he stayed silent, offering a faint smile. If I quit, who'll prove them wrong? His body betrayed him. Over 20 seasons of hits left clear tolls. His right shoulder stiffened, knees ached in damp weather, fingers numbed from nerve damage. Mornings required 2 hours of therapy, just to hold a ball normally. But on the field, under the glow of spotlit stands, his eyes blazed like the 30-year-old he once was. Deep in his heart, the boy rejected for his skin, the young man who left his country for a dream, whispered that stopping was betraying himself. Seattle welcomed him as a reborn icon. He played better than anyone expected, passes still precise, spirals tight, just not as far. In 1997, he threw over 400 yards in a game at 40, stunning the NFL, but when the lights dimmed, pain returned. Every night, he woke to a tingling spine. Sometimes he couldn't lift his right arm to turn off the bedside lamp, using his left to flick the switch. Mornings, he suited up, hiding his limp. Day by day, he fought not just opponents, but his own body. Doctors warned, each hit could be your last. He nodded, smiled. I've heard that since 1978, they didn't understand. For Moon, the real fear wasn't broken bones, but being forgotten. In sports, glory fades like fireworks, and Heath Voice, who shattered every barrier, refused to let his light die quietly. In 1998, against Oakland, after consecutive missed passes, he was benched mid-quarter. The crowd fell silent. As he walked to the sideline, cameras zoomed on his sweat-soaked face, eyes fixed on the scoreboard, not angry, not defeated, just quietly sad. A commentator whispered over the mic, "The great Warren Moon looks mortal tonight." The words echoed like a final note, but for Moon, it was just a signal for another fight. The next season, he signed a short contract with the Kansas City Chiefs, his last team. Many said he should retire, but he insisted, "I can still throw. If I'm breathing, I'm playing." At Arrowhead, red-soaked stands watched him like a man out of time. In the locker room, young players called him Sir, respectful yet distant. Some days he arrived early, silently slipped on gloves, and stared at the misty field. The ball in his hand trembled, not from cold, but from weakened wrist nerves. He gripped tighter, chasing the old feel, leather's scent, the familiar sound as it left his hand. His final NFL game came like a blink. A routine hit swelled his knee, forcing him off. As medics led him away, he glanced back at the stands. No one stood, no applause, just the familiar stadium music playing like an unnoticed farewell. The next day, a small headline read, "Warren Moon may retire after injury." No grand goodbye, no ceremony, no tribute night. Just a gray morning, and a man packing his life into a duffel bag. Back home in Seattle, he sat alone in the living room, rain streaking the window. Trophies, plaques and victory photos lined the shelves. But his eyes fixed on an old picture, a 12-year-old in Los Angeles, clutching a worn ball, grinning innocently. He touched the frame, smiled sadly. "You went pretty far, didn't you?" he whispered. Then he looked at his scarred, trembling hands. His body had failed, but his will remained ruthlessly steadfast. Moon once told an old friend, "I don't know how to stop. I only know how to keep going." That was his tragedy. A man who couldn't rest, couldn't retreat, couldn't accept that time wins all. At 44, when others had left the spotlight, he still stood under it, knowing it now lit only his cracks. On his career's final night, he went to an empty field, throwing a few passes for himself. Each ball left his hand, glinting under thin rain in the stadium lights, sparkling like metal. On the last throw, it hit the goalpost, bounced back, and rolled to his feet. He bent down, picked it up, looked at the empty stands, and said softly, "I've proven enough," but deep down he knew it was never enough. For a man like Warren Moon, the greatest victory always came with the deepest loneliness. Summer 2006, Canton, Ohio glowed under August sun. Thousands flocked to the Pro Football Hall of Fame's grand ceremony, where legends were immortalized in bronze and memory. Among resounding names, Reggie White, Troy Aikman, one stirred the crowd's emotion, Warren Moon. The man once rejected for his skin, who left his country to hold a ball, was now to be etched into eternity. As thunderous applause filled Canton Square, he stepped to the podium slowly, his deep purple suit reflecting the sunlight. Before him stood his bronze bust, his face, gaze steadfast, lips closed as if holding an unspoken truth. In the front row, his mother Pat, who worked nights as a nurse to raise 7 children, wept. Tears glistened on her cheeks, falling onto an old handkerchief. "My boy did it," she whispered, as if to herself. In the stands, chants of "Moon, Moon" echoed endlessly. Old Edmonton and Houston fans waved banners, photos, faded jerseys, even weathered footballs. A reporter said, "This isn't just honoring a player, it's football's redemption." And indeed, in that light, Warren Moon seemed to have defeated history itself. But at the microphone, his voice was low and measured, not that of a man drunk on victory. "Thank you," he began, "but today isn't about me. This is for everyone told they weren't good enough, smart enough, didn't belong." The stands fell silent. "When I was a boy in Los Angeles," he continued, "I had no father, only my mother. When I wanted to be a quarterback, they laughed. When I won the Rose Bowl, they didn't call my name. When I left in the snow, I thought America would forget me. But today I'm back, not for revenge, but to say we survived." His voice broke. The crowd stood, applause crashing like waves. Yet inside, a void opened. As the purple velvet draped his bronze bust, the countdown began, and the cloth fell, light glinting off the metal face. Warren stared long, half in awe, half estranged. That face was his, but no longer him. It was too perfect, too calm, while the real man was cracked, scarred, sleepless. Strange, he thought. They only cast statues when you're no longer yourself. That night, after the ceremony, he returned to his hotel alone. The suit lay folded on a chair, the Medal of Honor on the table. He turned on the TV, sports channels replaying his speech, the crowd's roar. He switched it off. The room sank into silence. Hallway light seeped through the door, reflecting on the wall, like Edmonton's snowy glow years ago. Memories flooded back, freezing nights throwing alone, nosebleeds, wind whistling through goalposts. Then Houston's locker room after the Buffalo loss, sitting amid sweat and tears. It all returned, vivid to the detail, as if victories never erased defeats, only amplified their echo. He stood, looking at himself in the mirror, a man nearing 60, silver at the temples, shoulders slightly crooked from old scars. He finally won, he told himself. But the victory arrived too late to heal. The triumph came, but the wounds had turned to scars. No light was bright enough to pierce through the time of loss. He thought of his father, who never saw him play, of his ex-wife, who sat silently after each win, and of his mother, now resting in the small Los Angeles home, where a black and white photo of young Warren, clutching a tattered football, still hung. The next morning, he returned to the Hall of Fame exhibit. Tourists crowded for photos, but he stood in a corner, baseball cap shading half his face. No one recognized him, and he preferred it that way. He gazed at the bronze busts lined up in soft light, their faces eternally smiling into the void. Stopping before his own, he lightly touched the cold surface. The bronze eyes stared distantly, while his real ones carried sadness. "You did it," he whispered, "but you lost so much too." That afternoon, leaving Canton, he glanced through the car window. The Hall of Fame plaza shrank, his bronze bust reflecting golden sunlight, glinting like an old scar. He gave a faint smile. Wish Dad could have seen this. In his heart, pride mingled with regret, the feeling of a man who reached the peak, but found no one left to share it with. On the flight back to Seattle, the sky burned red with sunset. Warren looked out the window, watching clouds drift below, like the years he'd passed through frigid Canada, roaring Houston, icy Minnesota, lonely Kansas City. He closed his eyes, leaned back, and thought, "I've finished the journey. But if I could, I'd still throw one more pass, just one in Edmonton's snowy fog, to remind myself that true glory isn't in the spotlight, but in standing up when no one's watching." In Canton, the bronze bust still stood, gleaming in Ohio's sun, and the name Moon echoed through each new season. But deep in his soul, a truth no one heard remained, that sometimes, the final victor isn't the one whose name is carved, but the one who dares endure it all to still feel alive. After Canton's golden light, after speeches of praise and lingering cheers, Warren Moon entered a new chapter, one without fanfare, only cold headlines and quiet shadows. People thought a bronze bust meant a life sealed at its peak, untouchable. But Warren knew better. Statues don't tremble, while humans still err, still hurt, still carry voids no glory can fill. In 1995, while still with Minnesota, his name hit front pages not for football, but for an arrest. That night, police got a call from neighbors about a domestic dispute at Moon's home. The news exploded like wildfire. Legendary quarterback arrested for assaulting wife. Hundreds of cameras swarmed the quiet suburban house. He was led out in sweats, eyes down, no cuffs, but looking like his soul was shackled. The next day, headlines screamed, "NFL's black role model falls from grace." Felicia, his wife who'd left him over distance, denied any abuse, calling it an argument. Weeks later, the court acquitted him for lack of evidence. But the public didn't need proof. They wanted a story. And that story rewrote his image. "I didn't hit anyone," he said curtly at a press conference, "but I can't win when they've already decided I'm guilty." 2 years later, he still played, still threw, but the looks in interviews had changed. Gone was the defiant confidence, replaced by the gaze of a man who knew reputation wasn't guarded by truth, but by silence. He chose silence, no defenses, no reactions, no countersuits. But in the modern media world, silence was as good as a confession. Then in 2007, more bad news struck. Moon, now retired, and a radio commentator in Seattle, was pulled over on the Bellevue Highway. The report read, "Driving under influence." His blood alcohol level slightly exceeded the limit. No crash, no resistance. But within hours, photos of him in a holding cell flooded the internet. From legend to lawbreaker, Moonlight fades. People forgot that weeks earlier, he'd spoken at a black scholarship fund. They only saw him sitting in detention, eyes on the concrete floor, silver hair disheveled. He pleaded guilty to a minor charge, paid a fine, and lost his license for 90 days. In court, when the judge asked, "Anything to say?" he replied softly, "I'd say that sometimes, those who strive to be a model, forget they're just human." But the darkest blow came in 2017. A former assistant at his company filed a lawsuit, alleging harassment and coercion. The news spread like old flames catching wind. Sports networks dropped his shows, the radio suspended his commentary, and his Hall of Fame image was pulled from some ads. No verdict, no trial yet, but the public had judged guilty. Warren appeared in court in a gray suit, face gaunt, eyes lowered. Before a forest of reporters, he said only, "I deny it all, and I'll let the truth do its work." Then he walked off, not looking back. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed relentlessly. The click-click sounded like gunfire in the night. He moved quickly, but each flash tore at his calm facade. In that moment, the legend was no legend, just a tired old man, head bowed in a media storm, facing lenses waiting for a weak expression to claim as exclusive. He didn't cry. Only when the car door closed did he slump over the steering wheel, hands trembling. Outside, flashes still pierced the glass, and reporters' calls faded into the dark. The lawsuit dragged until 2019, then settled quietly. No one won, no one lost, no one spoke more. But when his name reappeared in media, it wasn't with legend. Now it was former player once sued. Reporters who once praised him avoided his gaze. Old friends called less. He lived reclusively, reading papers daily, flipping to sports pages, seeing his image in top 10 NFL scandals. He wasn't angry, just tired. A close friend said Moon grew quiet then. He'd drive to Seattle's waterfront at night, sit in his car for hours, lights off, staring at the sea. "I used to have the world listening," he said. "Now I just want to hear myself." Sometimes, he turned on sports radio. When hosts mentioned him, their tone carried pity, distance. He'd switch it off, sit in silence. Once a friend asked, "Are you angry, Warren? At the media, the public?" He replied, "No, I'm just angry at myself for thinking they loved the man, not the icon I made." In a rare 2019 interview, a young reporter asked, "Do you feel unfairly treated?" Moon smiled sadly. "No, I feel human, and humans make mistakes, but what I've learned is the public forgives victories faster than vulnerabilities." That sentence closed it all. In the quiet of his Lake Washington home, Warren Moon watched the sunset tint the water faint orange. Beside him were old photos, him in a snow-dusted Eskimo's jersey, in Vikings purple, in a Hall of Fame suit, all radiant, while he now was gray. Sometimes, he fingered the Canton gold medal, tracing his engraved name, and smiled bitterly. The world had cast him in bronze, but broken him with headlines. Night fell, Seattle's lights sparkling on the water like 1,000 memory shards. He wondered if anyone recalled the real journey, the snowy days, the injuries, the lonely nights, or just the sad courthouse photos. Maybe both. Maybe no one remembered enough. Turning off the light, the only glow left came from the Canton photo on the wall. He looked at it one last time, whispering like a confession to himself, "The public forgives victories faster than vulnerabilities." Then he closed his eyes. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the weary breath of a legend who'd walked through glory, through scandal, and now faced only himself, small, silent, painfully real. After the lawsuit, Warren Moon withdrew from television, avoiding major sports events. He settled near Lake Washington in a modest 2-story wooden house, far smaller than his old Houston mansion. Mornings he walked the lake's edge, hands in his coat pockets, back slightly hunched, eyes distant. Neighbors still recognized him, the 1980s hero, the QB who threw like he was composing music in the air. They smiled. He nodded back, his smile kind but tired. In his 60s, he no longer chased applause. What he chased now was memory, slipping away like mist on the lake. The doctors called it mild cognitive impairment, the result of concussions accumulated over 2 decades of hits. He called it simpler, memory's ghosts. Sometimes, mid-conversation, he'd pause, grasping for a simple word, a player's name, a city, a friend. Once in a short interview, he forgot the name of his old team, Edmonton, then laughed awkwardly.
Oh, low, 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 low. Forget where they started.
The doctor advised him to write things down to train his memory. From then on, each night, as the city fell quiet, he sat at his desk, flicked on the yellow lamp, and opened a worn brown leather notebook. On the first page, in scrawled handwriting, "I'm still okay, but sometimes I forget the space between 2 words." But he knew those gaps weren't just age, they were the cruel legacy of the career that made him. The head slams into turf, the crush of 260-pound defenders, the sudden neck twists from blindside hits. They returned not as images, but as sensations, ringing in his ears, flashing light then darkness, the smell of grass and sweat mingling with blood. Sometimes at night, he woke to his heart pounding, thinking he was still at the Astrodome. He heard crowds roaring, the ball leaving his hand, then realized it was just darkness around him. The doctor gave him a sleep monitor. Each night, the sound of his heartbeat and electric pulses echoed in the silent room. Beep, 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 each sound marking the fragility of memory. Once the device flagged an anomaly, sending him to the hospital. Lying on the bed, white light glaring into his eyes, he recalled the surgical lights of 1996, the chill of Edmonton's practice field. The body always remembers, the doctor said, but the brain wants to forget. He smiled. That's the problem. I don't want to forget. More former players were diagnosed with CTE, brain degeneration from repeated concussions. He read about them, old friends, old rivals, and saw himself in their stories. One lost the ability to speak. Another took his own life. Warren feared that more than anything, not death, but losing identity, not knowing who he was, what he did, who he was to the world. To him that was erasure. If I forget the game, he told a close friend, what was the point of all these scars? Some mornings by the lake, fog hung thick, the cold water reflecting his face mixed with the sky. He looked down, unsure who he saw. The reflection was both familiar and strange. The man who threw 70,000 yards now moved slowly, hands trembling slightly holding coffee. He'd joke, my body was once a weapon, now it's a map of wounds. His shoulders bore scars, finger joints clicked, knees creaked on steps. But the deepest fear wasn't physical pain, it was slipping from reality. Some days he'd drive into town, forgetting where he meant to go. Once he realized he'd crossed the Tacoma Bridge, 30 miles past home. He laughed, but his eyes held panic. One night, he sat in the living room, lights off, only the faint glow of the heart monitor. Outside, rain tapped the windows. He opened his notebook, wrote shaky lines. My body remembers every fall, my brain tries to forget them, but between the two, I'm trapped, a man living between glory and darkness. Then he closed it, pressed it to his chest, and sighed. The doctor suggested he join a study on old brain injuries. They asked him to donate his brain after death, to learn more about CT. He nodded without hesitation. If I can't throw any more, at least I can leave something behind. But inside, he knew he was signing a silent will, that one day, his body would speak for the memories fading away. When winter came, Seattle wore a rare thin snow, like the last fragments of memory. Through the window, he watched kids throw snowballs, and suddenly recalled his first throw in Los Angeles. But the memory came and went like a breath. He tried to hold it but couldn't. That feeling scared him more than lawsuits, injuries, or past spotlights. The fear of losing himself, piece by piece, word by word, memory by memory. One evening, an old friend visited, asking, "You okay, Warren?" He smiled. "I'm fine, just sometimes forget the space between two words." The friend laughed, thinking it a joke, but Moon didn't. He turned to the window, watching the misty rain, and in the glass's reflection saw two images entwined. The man now and the boy from long ago, standing in that old Los Angeles apartment, hearing his mother's cough, tears falling silently. Both gazed at each other, a reminder even if memory fades, the soul doesn't forget. At midnight, he wrote one last line in his journal, "My body is retelling everything I forgot." Then he closed it, turned off the light, letting darkness flood the ceiling like water. In the quiet room, only the steady beat-beat of his heartbeat remained, the pulse of a heart that lived fully through glory, failure, and now, lived on with memories melting like fog on the lake. One early spring morning in Seattle, a faint moon still hung in the sky, reflecting on Lake Washington's mirror-like surface. Warren Moon sat by the window, his coffee gone cold in his hand. He'd just returned from a meeting with students receiving scholarships from the Crescent Moon Foundation, which he founded in 1989, at the height of his fame. Back then, he said he wanted to give chances to kids overlooked like I was. Over 30 years later, the foundation still ran, helping hundreds of poor black students attend college. The press called him a hero off the field. But to Warren, that title was just another form of atonement, for mistakes, fractured memories no one saw. The ceremony was in a small Tacoma high school auditorium. Dozens of students sat below, eyes shining as he shared his story, a fatherless boy in Los Angeles, rejected by all, then forging through snow, blood and loneliness to become a legend. He spoke slowly, voice hoarse but warm. "I'm not giving you money, I'm giving you a mirror. Look into it and believe anything is possible, if you don't give up." The room stood, applauding. A girl approached, hugged him, crying, "I want to be like you." Warren leaned down, said softly, "Don't be like me, kid, be better." When the event ended, everyone left, and he stayed alone on the stage. Late afternoon moonlight slipped through a window, illuminating a banner with the foundation's logo, a silver crescent around a football. He stared long, the light glinting on his silver hair, then whispered, almost inaudibly, "That mirror has cracks." That night, back at his lakeside home, he opened his laptop, looking at photos with the students. Their faces glowed, while he smiled in every shot. But behind the smile, his eyes held something else: fatigue, displacement, fear of being forgotten. He once believed helping others would heal him. But the more he gave, the emptier he felt. The scholarships, speeches, applause, all echoed in a room without resonance. "I'm no saint," he wrote in his notebook, "just a man trying to believe meaning still exists." The next morning, he drove to the foundation's office, a small building with a crescent moon foundation sign. Young staff greeted him with bright smiles, calling him Mr. Moon. He shook hands, asked about their lives, then entered his private office. The walls were lined with photos of successful alumni, doctors, engineers, teachers. He looked at their faces and felt lighter. But deep down, a small voice asked, "Do they know the man helping them is forgetting himself?" He touched a frame, saying softly, "I hope no one carries scars like mine, ones unseen, unforgotten, unhealed." As afternoon fell, he got a call from a former scholar, now a teacher in California. The young man said, "Because of you, I believed I could be different. Now I'm teaching kids like I was." Moon went silent, eyes welling. "Thank you," he said softly, "but don't thank me. Thank life for letting you stand tall." When the call ended, he looked out the window. The sun was setting, the moon rising, reflecting on a small bronze bust of himself on the desk, a mini version from the Hall of Fame. Moonlight hit the bust, revealing a tiny crack at the temple he'd never noticed. He picked it up, turned it in the light, fingers tracing the flaw. "Even bronze isn't perfect," he whispered. "Light still shines through the cracks." Late that night, he sat on the porch, watching Lake Washington shimmer under the moon. Gentle waves lapped the shore like memory's breath. He thought of his mother, who taught him kindness was the one thing no one could steal. He smiled, saying softly, "I'm trying, Mom, I'm trying." Then he closed his eyes, imagining himself back on the old Commonwealth field, snow all around, ball in hand. Across from him stood the 7-year-old boy from long ago, also holding a ball, looking at him. "You tired, mister?" the boy asked. Warren knelt, replying, "Only when I stop believing." A breeze rippled the lake, scattering the moon's reflection into 1,000 broken lights. Like his life, shattered pieces of glory. Douglas Adams, pride, loss, and compassion. Maybe no one was truly perfect, he thought, but the most beautiful light often came from the deepest cracks. Before going inside, he wrote a few more lines in his journal. "Crescent moon. The moon isn't full, but it's enough to light the way. I spent my life proving darkness doesn't beat light, even if the light trembles, even if it carries cracks." Out there, the Hall of Fame bronze bust in the living room began to gleam under the real moonlight. The crack at its temple reflected a strange streak of light, like a scar turned into a halo. Warren stood there, staring long, then softly said, as if an unfinished conclusion, "The light's still there, though not whole." And as he turned off the lamp, moonlight still streamed through the window, casting shadows on the bronze bust, where each crack was no longer a flaw, but proof that sometimes, true light only shines when one dares to look at what's broken. August 2025, Nashville glowed in purple hues and flashing lights. At Nissan Stadium, 70,000 fans rose as one, when a silver-haired man slowly emerged from the tunnel. Warren Moon, 68, back hunched, still clutching jersey number 1, the number that followed him through life, from frigid Edmonton to blazing Houston years. The ceremony wasn't for honor, but for passing the torch, a symbol of a generation handed to the next. The Titans had drafted a young black QB, Malik Rivers, 22, lean eyes bright with eagerness. The team invited Moon to present him with the number 1 jersey, not just fabric, but history, a reminder of the pioneer who endured so others could stand here today. On the field, Moon walked slowly to the center, his breath mingling with the roar of cheers. The giant screen replayed his moments, long throws in Edmonton snow, uncanny passes in Houston, the moment he held the Hall of Fame trophy. Each image was a piece of his life, a piece of his soul. Standing before Rivers, he paused, raising the jersey, staring at that lone number 1, both a symbol and a curse. His voice trembled, not from age, but from emotion caught in his throat. "I wore this number," he said slowly, "when they said we shouldn't hold the ball. When they said minds and leadership didn't belong to people like me. I wore it not just to play, but to prove them wrong." Then he handed the jersey to the young man, placing a hand on his shoulder. Now, it's yours, and I hope you'll wear it with heart, not for revenge, but to carry on." The stands erupted in applause, mixed with sobs. Malik Rivers hugged him, choking on words. A few tears fell onto the jersey, blending with old sweat and memories. Moon nodded slightly, smiling, but tears welled in his eyes. As he withdrew his hand, he gently traced the number 1, as if stroking his own memories, all the lost years, all he endured so others could play freely today. After the ceremony, organizers asked him to say a few words. He stepped to the mic, voice hoarse and low like late-season wind. "When I came to the NFL, they said I didn't belong. I lived my life proving them wrong. But today, seeing you, Malik, and the other faces, I realize I don't need to prove anything anymore. You've done it for me." He paused, took a deep breath, eyes scanning the stands. "Someone asked what it's like to be a legend. I say it's like holding a flame too long, enough to light others, but enough to burn your hand. Now, I pass that flame. Hold it, but don't let it consume you." The stadium fell silent. Malik stood beside him, head bowed, gripping the jersey. As Moon stepped back, the young man raised the jersey high before the crowd. Applause thundered like a storm. Under blazing lights, silver confetti fell, glinting like moon shards, the signature moonlight now scattering everywhere. Warren walked slowly off the stage, passing old teammates, aged faces with still sparkling eyes. One touched his shoulder, whispering, "You did what history couldn't for us." Moon smiled faintly, replying, "I just tried to keep the flame alive." Heading down the tunnel, he paused, looking back at the field. The image of the young QB standing amid the stands, holding up the number 1 jersey, pierced his heart. In the stage lights, he saw an invisible thread linking them, past to future, glory to pain, pride to its cost. He knew this moment wasn't just passing a jersey, but passing a piece of his soul, one that fought, broke, bled and never dimmed. He walked on, slowly, the cheers fading behind. In the tunnel's darkness, only his footsteps echoed, steady and soft. Cold fluorescent lights lit his face, where wrinkles mapped a lifetime of endurance. He said softly, to himself, "Maybe this is the first time I can truly rest." Outside, the celebration continued, fans still cheering, but in him was a strange stillness, not emptiness, but release. He recalled his mother's words, "When you give away what you love most, that's when you understand true love." Today, he did that. He gave not just a jersey, but a story, a belief. The name Moon no longer one man's, but belonging to all who dared dream. Stepping outside, Nashville's wind blew strong, cold but refreshing. He looked up at the sky, the moon rising, full and bright, shining on the still-lit stands. Funny, he thought, my whole life I chased the moon, and now it's seeing me off. Warren Moon turned, walked slowly to the parking lot, each step lighter. On the field, cheers lingered, but in him, the only sound was his calm heartbeat, mixed with a strange feeling, like a flame passed on, leaving a warm burn on his hand. That night, in his hotel room, he turned on the TV, seeing Malik Rivers in an interview. The young man said, "When he gave me the jersey, it felt like holding history." Moon smiled, turned off the TV, stood by the window, watching the moon reflect on the glass. In that light, his face blurred, leaving only his eyes, bright and wet. He said softly, like a final farewell to himself, "I carried the flame through the dark, now it's their turn to light the rest." And as the full moon shone on the Hall of Fame bust in distant Canton, its light reflected back to Nashville, where a young man wore the number 1 jersey, following the man who turned adversity into legacy. There, in the intersection of past and future, Warren Moon's soul remained, radiant, warm and free. Late autumn morning, 2027, Seattle's sunlight slanted through the window, thin as thread. Warren Moon stood in the bathroom, facing the large mirror. The reflection showed a face he sometimes didn't recognize, eyes clouded, threaded with fine red veins, a forehead etched with wrinkles like scars from decades of throes, a jaw trembling slightly, as he steadied himself after a sleepless night. He touched his cheek, the skin rough, colder than before, not just age, but time, the final opponent he couldn't defeat. In the mirror, his eyes still shone, but no longer blazed. They held the light of a man who'd reached journey's end, and was learning to let go. "I'm scared of the day I can't see my son's face clearly," he said softly, almost a prayer. The words dissolved into the damp air, lingering on the mirror like breath. At 70, his memories faded, but his son Damon's image was the last flame he clung to. Each morning, Damon stopped by, helping him exercise, read the paper, laugh, but sometimes, mid-story, Warren paused, eyes drifting. "What'd you just say?" he'd ask, voice light, laced with worry. Damon smiled, repeated himself. Warren exhaled, relieved, but a quiet fear grew, that one day, even his son's face would only live in old photos. The world around him changed fast. Contemporaries were gone or forgotten. Some chose surgery, reshaping faces to cling to past glory. He saw Simon Cowell's frozen Botoxed face on TV and silently turned it off. Not judging, just knowing he was different. "I spent my life fighting things I couldn't control," he thought. "Now I just want to see the truth, however ugly." So he kept it all: silver hair, wrinkles, surgical scars, the small cut on his finger from long ago. All were witnesses to his journey. In his study, the Hall of Fame bronze bust stood quietly on a shelf. Moonlight once glinted off the tiny crack at its temple, now dulled by time. Warren sat, looked at the bust, then at the wooden box beside it, inside old leather gloves, worn at the palms from thousands of throws. He picked them up, feeling the soft cold leather against his skin. The faint smell of sweat and artificial turf lingered. Images flooded back: Edmonton's snow, Houston's sun, Astrodome's lights, Nashville's stands when he passed the #1 jersey. All surged into a wave of feeling, warm yet painful. He opened a drawer, pulled out a clear glass case, the wooden box fitting perfectly inside. He placed the gloves within, straightening them. Then he closed the lid, locking it with a small key. When the soft click sounded, Warren closed his eyes. It was the sound of an era ending. His life had been a fight to prove age, race, injuries, or memories couldn't defeat him. But now, in the quiet room with wind slipping through the door's crack, he realized the real battle was time, and he'd reached the moment to lay down his sword. He looked in the mirror again. The reflection seemed kinder, tired, but at peace. "I was once the light," he thought. "Now I'm the wrinkles of that light." A faint smile curved his lips, a rare smile, not for the crowd, but for himself. No need for polish, no need to pose, just acceptance. That afternoon, Damon came by again. Father and son sat on the porch, watching the lake reflect the daylight moon. "Dad, I'm planning a new scholarship fund, named after you." Warren smiled faintly. "That name's been around long enough. Name it after yourself." Damon looked at him, asked, "Aren't you afraid of being forgotten?" He replied slowly, "No, son, because when you remember, it means I'm still here." After Damon left, he went inside, flicked on a dim lamp. The bathroom mirror now reflected soft light, spreading like mist. He stepped closer, hand touching the cold glass. In the mirror, he saw two images overlaid: the silver-haired man of today and the young man throwing in Edmonton's snow. Their gazes met, wordless, only smiling. Between them, the glass case holding the gloves sat still on the table, catching moonlight like a faint glow struggling to endure. Warren sat, staring long at the case, then whispered, "Time wins, but it doesn't steal memory." He placed the key in the drawer, closed it. Outside the window, the full moon hung low, its silver light hitting the bronze bust in the living room, revealing the faint crack at its temple, now faded, but still there. The crack mirrored him, imperfect, not eternal, but real. Before bed, he looked in the mirror again. Once more the figure stared back, tired, but free. "If anything remains," he said softly, "it's the courage to grow old without hiding." Then he turned off the lamp. Moonlight spilled through the window, grazing the mirror, casting a soft glow through faint dust. In that overlap, his face and reflection seemed to merge. The mirror and the moon, two halves of one soul, one that lived, and one quietly dissolving into the light. Seattle's sunset stretched like a red velvet curtain, draping the empty stadium. The stands were silent, only a soft wind rustling the flags atop poles. On the faded green turf, Warren Moon sat alone on an old wooden chair by the 1-yard line, kept by the stadium to honor its legends. He wore a thick sweater, held a cold tea, eyes fixed on the field's end, where millions of lights, cheers and dreams once rested on his shoulders. Now, only faint orange streaks of dusk swept across his deeply lined face. On the upper steps, a groundskeeper flipped on the lights, a weak golden glow falling over the stands. The space froze in stillness, only his shadow stretching long across the yard line, long and lonely, like his life had been. Moon touched the turf lightly, tracing the number 1, its white paint fading with time. A breeze carried Seattle's damp scent, and the familiar smell of artificial grass. He smiled faintly, his voice so soft it was almost to himself. I didn't get the team to the Super Bowl, but maybe I got a generation to the starting line. The words dissolved into the air, echoing in the wind before sinking into the field. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. Images returned like an old film. The boy in Los Angeles clutching a tattered ball, the young man snubbed in the 1978 NFL draft, the man throwing in Edmonton's blizzard, nose bleeding, back numb, the loser of the comeback, and finally the old father with trembling hands watching moonlight on his bronze bust. All of them, all versions of himself, seemed to sit beside him on this bench, silent, but at peace. At 70, Warren no longer recalled every number, how many yards, how many wins, how many trophies. But he remembered every feeling, Edmonton's cold, Houston's crowds, Seattle's wet grass, and above all, the moment a ball left his hand, that fleeting space between control and surrender, where faith outshone fear. That's all I ever had, he thought, a moment soaring through the air, between light and dark. The moon rose, its light pooling on the field like spilled silver. Warren looked at it, smiled, a smile free of pain, only gratitude. Glory may fade, he said softly, but the moon still shines in the dark. His eyes closed, and for a moment all sound vanished. He heard his heartbeat, slow but steady, blending with the wind's rhythm. In the stands, a night bird perched, looking down at the lone man in the vast field. Perhaps it sensed something, a closing, but not an end. He bent down, grabbed a small tuft of grass, clutching it tightly. I've been through it all, he whispered, and I'm still here. Not in the Hall of Fame, not in statues, but right here on this ground, where every yard was a memory, every scratch a story. He knew tomorrow they'd clean the grass, repaint the field, erase his footprints, but he also knew some marks can't be wiped, those in the people who watched him play, in the kids who believed they too could throw, in the first touch of a ball by a new generation. A groundskeeper approached, hesitantly saying, "Mr. Moon, it's getting dark, we need to turn off the lights." He nodded, smiled kindly, "Go ahead and kill the lights, the moon's enough." Then he stood, walked slowly to the exit. His shadow stretched across the 1-yard line, then vanished. As he stepped into the dark, behind the stadium sank into silence, only moonlight quietly flooding the turf, like a final halo for the man who turned night into light. A narrator's voice rose slow and deep, as if from far away. He threw over 60,000 yards through blizzards, spotlights and a nation's doubt. He lost the biggest games, but won what mattered most, making the world believe everyone deserves to hold the ball, to dream, to lead. Glory may fade, but the moon still shines in the dark. Music swelled, a piano's soft notes weaving with the sound of wind through empty stands. The imagined screen faded, leaving only a small man's silhouette on the grass, under moonlight pooling on the white yard line. Then a final voice, like a quiet message to viewers, to those who followed him. If his story moved you, remember that every yard forward cost a piece of his soul. In Seattle's night, the full moon lit the distant Canton bust. From the crack at its temple, a thin ray of light escaped, falling to the earth, like a whisper from a soul that never faded. Somewhere between light and dark, Warren Moon threw his final pass, not toward the goalpost, but toward eternity. Perhaps the saddest thing about Warren Moon's story isn't the falls on the field, but the cost of rising again. From the fatherless boy in South Central LA, clutching a tattered ball, hearing his mother's cough in the night, to the college star denied a quarterback spot by major teams, Moon turned rejection into fuel. When the 1978 Rose Bowl named him MVP and the NFL still turned away, he left home for Edmonton, practicing in freezing fog, nose bleeding, back aching, to win 5 Grey Cups and 2 MVPs. Returning to Houston, he broke records, earned 9 Pro Bowls, but the comeback's 41-38 loss to Buffalo in 1993 scarred him. I could beat any defense but never the past. In Minnesota 1996, the crack of his collarbone, the white-lit operating room. Then the late 1990s in Seattle and Kansas City, body failing, hands trembling, knees aching, yet eyes still ablaze. Canton 2006 cast his bust in bronze. His mother wept, but he felt empty. Victory came too late to heal. Headlines in 1995, 2007, 2017, 2019 showed the public forgives victories faster than vulnerabilities. He chose silence, then turned to the Crescent Moon Foundation. I don't give kids money, I give them a mirror, though privately admitting that mirror has cracks. Passing the #1 jersey to a young Titans QB in 2025, he handed over both a flame and a piece of his soul, and at the end, by the 1-yard line, he said, I didn't get the team to the Super Bowl, but maybe I got a generation to the starting line. Lessons for Americans today: 1. Persist through prejudice. Sometimes the right path detours through icy Canada. 2. Respect body and mind's limits. CTE, sleeplessness, fear of forgetting his son's face, health outweighs medals. 3. Forgive responsibly. See people wholly, flaws and redemption alike. 4. Invest in the future. Scholarships, passing the #1 jersey to the next generation. Glory may fade, but the moon still shines, as long as we take 1 more yard, knowing each yard costs a piece of the soul. If Warren Moon's story touched you, hit subscribe to join us in exploring the cracks in glory and the light of human resilience. Thank you for listening. See you in the next video, where we shine on more moons glowing through life's darkness.